Medieval India, page number 129, chapter number 11. Literature and Fine Arts. Sanskrit literature. Sanskrit continued to be a vehicle for higher thought and a medium for literature during the period under review. In fact, the production of works in Sanskrit in different branches was immense and perhaps greater than in the preceding period. Following the great Sankara, works in the field of Advaita philosophy by Ramanuja, Madhava, Vallabha, etc., continued to be written in Sanskrit. The speed with which their ideas were widely disseminated and discussed in different parts of the country showed the important role which Sanskrit continued to play during the period. There was a network of specialized schools and academies in different parts of the country, including areas under Muslim domination. These schools and academies were not interfered with and continued to flourish. Academies were not interfered with and continued to flourish. In fact, many of them took advantage of the introduction of paper to reproduce and disseminate older texts. Thus, some of the oldest available texts of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata belong to the period from the 11th or 12th century onwards. Besides philosophy, works in the field of kavya, poetical narrative, drama, fiction, medicine, astronomy, music, etc., continued to be written. A large number of commentaries and digests on the Hindu law, Dharma Shastras, were prepared between the 12th and the 16th century. The great Mitakshara of Vijneshwar, which forms one of the two principal Hindu schools of law, cannot be placed earlier than the 12th century. Another famous commentator was Chandeshwar of Bihar, who lived in the 14th century. Most of the works were produced in South, followed by Bengal, Maithila, and Western India under patronage of Hindu rulers. The Jains too contributed to the growth of Sanskrit. Hemachandra Suri was the most eminent of these. Oddly enough, these works largely ignored the presence of the Muslims in the country. Little attempt was made to translate Islamic works of Persian literature into Sanskrit. Possibly the only exception was the translation of the love story of Yusuf and Zulaikha, written by the famous Persian poet Jami. This might be taken to be an index of the insularity of outlook which had been mentioned by El-Baruni earlier. Refusal to face the existing reality may be one of the reasons why much of the writing of the period is repetitive and lacks fresh insight or originality. Arabic and Persian literature. Although the greatest amount of literature produced by the Muslims was in Arabic, which was the language of the Prophet and was used as the language of literature from Spain to Baghdad. The Turks who came to India were deeply influenced by the Persian language, which had become the literary and administrative language of Central Asia from the 10th century onwards. In India, the use of Arabic remained largely confined to a narrow circle of Islamic scholars and philosophers. Most of the original literature on the subject being written in Arabic. A few works on science and astronomy were also translated into Arabic. In course of time, digests of Islamic law were prepared in Persian with the help of Indian scholars. The most well-known of these were prepared in the reign of Firoz Tughlaq, but Arabic digests continued to be prepared. The most famous of these being the Fatwa-e-Alamgiri, or the Digest of Laws prepared by a group of jurists under the reign of Aurangzeb. With the revival of the Turks in India during the 10th century, a new language, Persian, was introduced in the country. There was a resurgence of Persian language in Iran and Central Asia from the 10th century onwards, and some of the greatest poets of the Persian language, such as Firdausi and Sadi, lived and composed their works between the 10th and the 14th centuries. From the beginning, the Turks adopted Persian as a language of literature and administration in the country. Thus, Lahore emerged as the first center for the cultivation of Persian language. Although the works of only a few of these early writers of Persian in India have survived, we find in the writings of some of them, such as Masood Salman, a sense of attachment and love for Lahore. However, the most notable Persian writer of the period was Amir Khusro. Born in 1252 at Patali near Badiu in West Uttar Pradesh, Amir Khusro took pride in being an Indian. He says, "I have praised India for two reasons. First, because India is the land of my birth and our country. Love of the country is an important obligation. Hindustan is like heaven. Its climate is better than that of Khorasan. It is green and full of flowers all year round. The Brahmins here are as learned as Aristotle, and there are many scholars in various fields." Khusro's love for India shows that the Turkish ruling class was no longer prepared to behave as a foreign ruling class, and that the ground had been prepared for a cultural rapprochement between them and the Indians. Khusro wrote a large number of poetical works, including historical romances. He experimented with all poetical forms and created a new style of Persian which came to be called the Sabak-e-Hindi, or the style of India. Khusro had praised the Indian languages, including Hindi, which he called Hindavi. Some of his scattered Hindi verses are found, though the Hindi work, Khalik Bari, often attributed to Khusro, was in all probability the work of a later poet of the same name. He was also an accomplished musician and took part in religious musical gatherings, Sama, organized by famous Sufi saint Nizamuddin Aulia. Khusro, it is said, gave up his life the day after he learned the death of his peer Nizamuddin Aulia, 1325. He was buried in the same compound. Apart from poetry, a strong school of history writing in Persian developed in India during the period. The most famous historians of the period were Ziauddin Barani, Afif, and Isami. Through the Persian language, India was able to develop close cultural relations with Central Asia and Iran. In course of time, Persian became not only the language of administration and diplomacy, but also the language of upper classes and their dependents. At the first in North India, and later of the entire country, with the expansion of the Delhi Sultanate to the south and the establishment of Muslim kingdoms in different parts of the country. Thus, Sanskrit and Persian, the main, functioned as link languages in the country in politics, religion, and philosophy, as well as being means of literary productions. At first, there was little interchange between the two. Zia Naqshbandi, 1350, was the first to translate into Persian Sanskrit stories, which were related by a parrot to a woman whose husband had gone on a journey. The book Tutinama, Book of the Parrot, written at the time of Muhammad Tughlaq, proved very popular and was translated from Persian into Turkish and into many European languages as well. He also translated the old Indian treatise on sexology, the Kok Shastra, into Persian. Later in the time of Firoz Shah, Sanskrit books on medicine and music were translated into Persian. Sultan Zain ul Abidin of Kashmir had the famous historical work Raja Tarangini and the Mahabharat translated into Persian. Sanskrit works on medicine and music were also translated into Persian at his instance. Thank you everyone for tuning in. In the next part, we will probably finish the chapter with the last topic remaining. On the screen right now, you might find the other playlists that we have created for all of you. Do watch them and do look at the previous chapters for your knowledge, and keep supporting us and helping us to grow this channel by liking and subscribing to the channel. All the best for exams. Do share and subscribe and keep supporting us. Thank you everyone.